Welcome to the Third Degree Masonic Podcast, where we are always on the level. I'm your host, Brother Samuel.
And I'm your co-host, Brother Gabriel.
And I'm your co-host, Brother Turco. Yeah, I'm in this episode now.
Craftsmen, today we're going to give you something a little bit different, kind of special. I'm going to tell you guys a personal story. A story about how this fraternity really saved me in a way. It's one of those times where we're not talking allegorically or telling a story or how it taught me something. I'm talking about a time where someone in this fraternity changed my life, changed how things could have gone, and genuinely pulled me out of darkness and gave me just a little tiny bit of light in probably one of the darkest points of my life. I know we've shared Brother Nefer's story with you. It's kind of going to be on the same level as that, but this time it's coming from my personal archive and why I am genuinely proud to be a part of this fraternity and the good that it can do. But the story of it at the end will probably surprise you, and I think that it has a very good message to all members of the fraternity that they should take with them.
And just to be clear, or to kind of enlighten the listeners, this is a story that Brother Gabriel and myself have never heard of.
Not to my knowledge.
And we don't know this person that you're going to be
You do not.
Not going to be sharing.
I will share his first name, but I cannot share his last name due to some technicalities.
Okay.
But anyways, so several years ago, most of you know, I was just going through college. I was at Owens Community College. I was starting off, I was doing my prerequisites to get into radiology. I was a pretty good student. Everything was going great. I worked a full-time job at Miller's. Everything was going great in Samland. Until the day that my parents came home and informed me when I was 20 years old that my father had terminal lung cancer. And there was a lot of mystery involved in that. There was, how long had he had it? Why had nobody caught it? How could this happen to me? How could this happen to us? And how bad really was it? And I can tell you that it was really, really bad. He didn't just have it in his lungs. He had a tumor the size of a golf ball in his lung, but it had metastasized to his liver, his kidneys, his bone. And I didn't quite know how bad that was until now, knowing what I know now working in healthcare. But we had all these questions, and it was something that I don't wish on anybody ever, and we did our best to fight it. And it was probably about 6 or 7 months of fighting, going to cancer treatments, going to doctor's appointments, and still going to school, still working a full-time job, still trying to keep the universe in some form of normalcy. And we even going to lodge and what have you, most of the brothers didn't know. I'm a pretty secretive person when I'm going through stuff like that. I don't want pity from people, and I don't tell this story to get pity from anybody. But anyway, I was given the opportunity about 3 or 4 months into everything to move up in the program, to have the next spot in the program. And my hope is that by doing that, maybe if Dad could make it 2 more years, that he would be able to see me graduate. He was very proud of the fact that I was in school and what I was doing. He was a Jeep worker. He didn't want me to be a Jeep employee or nothing against Jeep for that, but he wanted me to do something different, something less labor intensive, more using my mind. So he was really proud of that fact, and we talked about, getting my little patch for the program or being in the program, how proud he was going to be that day. So I got to move up, but to move up, I had to take a bunch of classes, all like rapid fire, all at the same time to get me ready to do this class. One of them was a physics class, talking about the basics of radiation physics. And the other one was a STNA nursing assistant class. And the theory behind that is the nursing assistant program taught you how to deal with patients, how to do the basic things that people have to do when it comes to patient care. I probably am never going to change a bedpan. I have. That's not my job curriculum, but I know how to do it and I can do it. And sometimes when the nurses are busy, I'll do it for them because we're a team. That's how we make things work, especially on third shift. But I took this class and it was 2 semesters long. It was a very long class. So the people that I was in this class with, I got to know really well. And a lot of the people in that class were also the same people that were getting ready to go into the program. So they were people that I was going to be spending the next 2.5 years with. I mean, essentially, they become a second family to you. You see them more than you see your friends and family. And I know you guys really weren't around so much for that, but Jack can tell you that there were times that I would stop over at his house, drink a beer with him, and then I would have to go study or do something else. Like, my life belonged to the college at that point. So I took this nursing class, and I got to know a lot of the people in it. And one of the guys in this class, his name was Rob. And Rob was the outgoing big guy. He was, loud and boisterous, but he was also charming and persuasive and just a genuine nice guy. And you could tell that he was genuinely excited about what he was doing. And he often talked to us about how he was turning over a new leaf in his life. He was, he had been doing these jobs, and he was ready for something different and ready for something that was going to let him make a change in his life. And, he wanted to be a nurse. And part of the nursing program was to take this STNA class. So you've got this class with the x-ray people who we pretty much hung out together. And then we had the nursing people. And for those of you that don't know, nursing and x-ray, sometimes we butt heads because we're both on different sides of the coin. If you had to say, I always like to say that healthcare is kind of like a skeleton, right? The doctors are the brain, we're the eyes in imaging. We see all of the things, and the nurses are the hands. And sometimes the hands and the eyes don't always have to do the same thing at the same time. So sometimes we butt heads, we don't understand each other's struggles. Usually we get over it for the betterment of the patient. Everybody thinks that what they're doing is the most important part, but really it's the whole skeleton that makes things happen. So we hung out, the radiology people hung out together and the nursing students hung out together. And about halfway through this lesson, we would get a break for about an hour, and the smokers would go downstairs and have their cigarettes, and everybody else would run to Arby's or, whatever and get food. I personally wasn't eating that much. I was dealing with a lot of stuff. I was going to the ER at 1 o'clock in the morning after Dad would have his cancer treatments because he'd be running a fever of 106, and sitting in the ER with him until he got out and studying so my mom could go home and go to sleep and go to work the next day. And we did that for quite some time, even during that nursing assistant program. But things were going okay. I mean, that stuff happens when you're getting chemotherapy, your immune system's compromised, but there was never a point where we thought, this is the worst it could be. So all of this classwork culminated into a final where we showed off the skills that we had, and then we would go to the nursing home after that for, I think it was 2 weeks, and we would practice those skills on actual patients. And a little bit before the final, I was out with the smokers, just hanging out, getting some fresh air, and Rob, who was normally with the nursing students, I talked to him 3 or 4 times maybe. Rob saw my ring, and Rob walked over and went, "You're a traveling man." And I said, "I am." And we shook hands. He gave me all 3. And I'm like, "Where are you from? I've never seen you before." He's like, "Oh, I'm from Northern Light." I too was from Northern Light. And after that moment, Rob and I were inseparable. We did everything together. We did our finals together. He was my partner for doing all these, moving the dummies and doing all of that stuff. And I've got a picture that I'll share with everyone for this episode of him and I taking that final. But it was really cool to have somebody in Lodge, and it wasn't like it did naturally happen, but it wasn't like we didn't have some affinity. Like I said, we had spent opposite sides of the room with our people, But the second we found out we were Masons, we just naturally gravitated to each other, and we did not separate. I tell you this story to tell you that upon finding out that Rob was a Mason, which was very cool, and because he gave me all the grips and everything, 100% in. You know what I mean? Like, I got no reason to question anything. So we're going to fast forward to another week when it's time to go and take our practicals and go out to this nursing home and do stuff on these patients. I woke up to my mom calling the squad. Dad was having a stroke. Tumor was sitting on his brainstem. And I looked at him and I had a pure moment of pure unknowing, not knowing what to do, and I had a conflict of ideals. Do I go finish this out? Because if I don't finish it out, I have to retake the whole thing. There's no doing it the next time. I have to take the whole class over again. But on the other side is my father and my family and my commitments to him. And I just stood there. It was like my batteries were not wired correctly and I didn't know what to do. And my dad looked at me and said, go. So I did. They put him in an ambulance and drove him to V's. And I went and did my nursing home practicals, if you want to call it that. And as I'm sure you guys can understand, there's a level of anxiety that I can't explain. Like feeling like your heart is literally going to beat out of your chest, but somehow having to keep that together enough so you can get through things. So I'm standing, I got there about 20 minutes before this was supposed to kick off, and I'm standing there. And I'm just scratchy. I'm pacing. I don't even know. And all of a sudden, Rob comes up to me and goes, you and I need to talk. And he walks me out and he goes, what's going on with you? Now, up to this point, I had not shared with anybody what was going on in my life. Not a single one of the people in my class knew what was going on. My teachers knew for the most part, especially my program people, because, stuff was going on and they kind of needed to know. And, but I didn't want to feel that pity. I didn't want people to like feel bad for me or give me this, I didn't want to look people in the eyes and see that sorrow, that pity in their face for me. I didn't want it. But I just blurted out to Rob and I told him everything that was going on that day. And he went, okay. And then he said some words to me that to this day still reverberate in my soul. And they're not profound. They're not deep. It wasn't some big long speech about how we're gonna, toughen up, do this, do that. He just looked me dead in my eyes and said, I got you. And he did. We went through that whole thing. We actually didn't get paired together for that because I think the teacher knew that we would just kind of beat it together. She wanted us to work with other people. Rob went out of his way to check on me multiple times throughout the day and ask me, how you doing? You okay? You need anything? And then we would get these little breaks and we would just go out to his car and he would smoke a cigarette in his car and I would just sit there and I cried, I screamed, I did whatever I had to get out. And he just sat there and said, you get it out, little brother. You get it out. You do what you got to do. Because we got to go back in there and we got to kick some butt. You got that, right? I said, yeah, I got it. And then every day for lunch, my classmates would get together and they would go find some fast food restaurant and they would go together. Well, that first night I left there, I went to V's and checked on my father. And they decided they were going to move him to a rehab unit to try and get his motor skills back up so that way hopefully they could discharge him back home to us. But the rehab unit they sent him to was the same nursing home that I was working at doing my clinicals. So I got to spend the next couple of times going there knowing that my father was 10 minutes down the hall in a different unit, which made things even more complicated. And I told Rob about that, and he and I talked about it in the morning, and he said, you gotta keep going, little brother. You gotta keep going. We're getting through this together. He's like, I got you. And then at the lunchtime, instead of going with my classmates to go get food, I would go over to the rehab unit and be with mom and dad. And Rob would make up stories for me because I told him I didn't want anybody to know. And, I couldn't even tell you what he would tell him because he didn't tell me. It didn't matter. He was covering for me because I asked him to. I just didn't want anybody to know. And we spent the next few days, and like I said, even though he wasn't my partner, he constantly checked on me texted me, sneaking my phone out. Hey, you good? Everything okay? How you hanging in there? And going out to his car and just getting it out and, giving me hugs and, just feeling like your entire universe is falling apart in front of you and still being able to look into that darkness because that darkness is going nowhere good and it's going nowhere good fast. But having a little tiny piece of light to hold on to and knowing that, I had you guys, I had my friends, but you guys couldn't be there with me. You couldn't go through that with me. I still had someone to hold on to and someone to help me keep my brain at least slightly intact. And he did. We got through that whole weekend or the whole week of doing that, and we got done with everything and we graduated, whatever. And, we stayed in contact. We texted back and forth, and we, he moved down to Florida for a while. He moved to a whole bunch of places, became a nurse. He's awesome. Awesome dude. Very caring nurse. But I found out because I wanted to be his mentor. He said that he was finishing up his third degree, or finishing up his degrees, and that's why he wasn't on a roster yet. Well, he never finished, passed his 90 days, and got too busy and was unable to finish it out. So he is not technically a Mason, not officially. But I always told him, and I will still to this day fight for it, that when he's ready to come back, I will make it happen. I owe that to him. I owe him so much. He did so much for me when he didn't have to. This man never truly finished out being a Mason. He was left in the wings and forgotten about for so long, but he truly did the Masonic thing. He was a Mason through and through and did exactly what we're supposed to do, with no expectation coming back from him other than he was helping another brother. And to this day, he still doesn't get to call himself technically a Mason. He knows everything. He knows all of our stuff, but he just was left in the wings. He's too busy. We did not do our due diligence in pulling him back, and he didn't continue to go through forward. Who to blame? Probably both sides, but I would argue that he's one of the most Masonic men I've ever met in my life. So the reason I tell you this story is, one, it's a good story on how Masons should act. And you never know what someone you meet is going through. And I was the same person I always am, strong. You couldn't have told me anything was happening until it got bad, until I had nothing to hold everything together. I was able to fake it for a while. But you never know what little things you do for somebody, especially another brother, can truly mean, or what you're going to mean to that person. I mean, he pulled me out of darkness. I don't know what I would have done without him. The universe put him in my path. The great architect of the universe, if you want to say that, God, whatever your true belief is, put him in my path. He knew I wasn't going to be able to handle it. I would have been a shaking mess. But Rob was there, and he kept me together. And all I can think of in my head is, I got you. That's all he had to say. There's no bullshit. Just, I got you. And I think makes us need to look back and, maybe we can have a talk about that, about pulling these Masons. These guys are joining this organization. They get their first degrees. They get their, maybe they'll make it to their second degree. But then we leave them in the wings. We leave them on a roster of, we got to get this done. We got to get this guy done first. And we got to get this done. And we got an inspection coming up. And we've got this coming up. And there's always all these things. There's always going to be another thing that comes up ahead of us. But these guys sit on a list. They're like, in the time of the samurai, there was a samurai without a master was known as a Ronin. What do you call a Mason without a lodge? Without a teacher who's never finished his stuff? He knows everything we know, but how do we help someone like that? How do we pull them back in? Because I'll tell you what, had we pulled him back in and had we been able to do so, Rob would have been one hell of a Mason. One hell of a Mason. And if you're listening to this, brother, you at least in my eyes, you're still my brother, and you're still a Mason to me, because you did everything that you're supposed to do. If I could have knighted you in the field, that's what it would have been. but it wasn't, to me, he didn't have to give back an exam or, give us some, go through some allegories. He truly should have, he is one. He did exactly what a brother's supposed to do by trial, by fire. And how many of these people did we lose? I don't know. But I know we have a few of them that we've lost. And after a certain amount of time, you just write them off. So my question to you is what are your thoughts?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Okay.
Number one, I am very much a trial by fire person. I believe in that. And from everything you've told me, I agree with you. I agree with you with your observations of this guy. The sad thing is that these Ronin Masons are, for lack of a better term, unaffiliated.
Right.
And that's the sad part. And my real thought on it is the problem of like this intergenerational masonry, because there are plenty of older Masons who have mentored many Masons.
Mm-hmm.
And but their time for mentorship is over. They could take on another mentorship, but they also have. They've served the fraternity, and it's this hard part of finding someone to be a mentor. I mean,
it's hard.
If I could rearrange how things work. I know sometimes we assign mentors to a candidate, and I know some people say that the lodge education officer, their job is to take care of the candidates, which is true, but I think almost like a trustee kind of position almost, where your only job is candidate mentorship, candidate phone calls, entered apprentice and fellow craft phone calls, so that you don't have to worry about inspections. You don't have to worry about traveling. Your only job, the only thing that you do to serve the lodge, is candidate mentorship. And the problem is, we're in this weird, I mean, all organizations face this. The commandery faces this. Even the military faces this. The lodge faces this, where there's just not enough people. You know what you need to do. I mean, this happens at work. We should have a crew of 15 plus people at work. We have 8.
Right.
So it means so many people are doing so much on their shoulders. It's hard to add mentorship on top of that. I mean, for me, I just had a kid. I'm working at my career. I'm working with commandery. I'm working with being worshipful master. I'm working with the guard. I have a lot of time commitments, and it's also hard for all of us in our age group to commit the kind of time that would require for a mentorship position. And some of the other members of the lodge, they've done the mentorship. It's time for other people to do mentorship, but we don't have the people to do the membership mentoring. It's this weird catch-22. Yes, it's just this vicious cycle of, you don't have enough, you know what to do, but you don't have enough people to do it. Or like there's a vision. There's a vision of how good it can be. There's a vision of how it needs to run and it needs to operate. But you've got to do the work to get the people to get to that point. And part of the reason why you're not getting the people to get to that point is you don't have enough people to make it efficient enough to get to that point.
Right.
And it's this vicious
catch-22.
Yeah, it's this vicious catch-22 cycle of how do we make Masons while also doing the craft work that we're mandated to do.
Well, and I think, at least in my opinion, I think, we had a problem. We recognized that we had a problem, and we currently have a few guys that we're getting through everything right now.
Our lodge is actually doing
We're doing a
real
good job.
well right now.
We are, and that's because a lot of the guys have stepped up, especially if they were the ones that signed their paperwork and know them personally. They're taking the time to kind of become those mentors themselves. And
Right Worshipful Brother Jeff Syme is doing a lot of legwork
He is
with
doing
mentoring candidates,
work.
and
so is Brother Taylor as
Mhm.
well. And
And-
we're lucky to have these guys that are able to do that.
and we've been getting phone calls from brothers who are their schedules are finally aligning. We have a brother who's finally retired from his second shift job that didn't allow him to come to lodge, and he wants to come back to lodge. We have Brother Heath Seckinger, who his work schedule has now changed to allow him to start coming back to lodge. Brother Greg Hurst, his medical problems have subsided a bit, and he wants to come back. We're on the up right now as our lodge.
But not all lodges are that lucky.
No, they're not. I mean, the shamefully Grand Rapids Lodge is closing its doors and merging with Rubicon Lodge. And I've never been to Grand Rapids Lodge, but it's an older lodge.
Mhm.
And I think it has something like 150 members on its roster, but they haven't had a stated meeting in 6 months.
Jeez.
I mean, a lot of their members are old guys who are either out of state or retired or.
Well, and I would hope that some of those guys are already at the Browning home, so maybe it'll be an easier transition going.
It might be. I mean, there is some benefits to merging,
but
and
still
consolidation. It is. It's, but that's the directly affiliated problems, which ties into the problem we have of retaining these quality candidates for Freemasonry. I mean, Rob sounds like as good of a candidate as Brother DeLong. Brother DeLong has been a amazing Mason.
Can confirm.
And
similar vibe too. Very similar.
So I mean, yeah, from everything you were telling me, it does strike me as similar. And I imagine if our lodge had Christian and Rob.
Oh, we'd be a powerhouse.
And so we've.
I just find it a shame. And my thing on this episode is not to be negative.
Yeah.
It really is not, because I feel like as Masons, I think we get some tunnel vision. We see only what's in front of us right now. We see the inspection that's coming up. We see the making it from this degree to this degree and doing, we have a meeting coming up, and then we have a Grand Master's reception, and then we have a this and a that and a this and a that.
This reminds me of...
It's just, at the end of the day, though, what does that all mean if we let these guys fade off into nothingness?
This will sound like a tangent, but it will tie into a point on this.
Sure.
So one of my recent trainings, we were doing an exercise where we had to set up a mock encampment, a mock operations center. It wouldn't really be a forward operating base because it's not a combat zone. A lot of military terms. It's just it would be like a base set up for a POD, a point of distribution.
Sure.
So we had to set up latrines, camping, water filtration, all that. We had to do a mock setup of it. And because of the work I do with my civilian infrastructure, I was put in the sewage and latrines and that stuff. And we got a passing grade on our setup, but our instructor's biggest critique was that all of the groups got tunnel visioned to their own task and didn't set up efficiently because we weren't communicating with each other. And I think that is a big problem that Freemasonry has, is lack of communication. Now, I know the Grand Lodge has really been trying to change that with Grand View and with, God, our cellular devices, an internet podcast for communication, all of that. But I really think that intrapersonal lodge communication, it might be lacking a little bit. I know for Commandery, our secretary, our Sir Knight Recorder, he calls everyone all the time. But we're a small chapter. It's a big job to call a roster of 150 people. It's a big job to make sure that you know everyone's schedules. I mean, because this is again a problem of micromanagement that comes in of, like, let's say me sitting in the East, I just can't, because of the way my brain works. Some people can, Ryan. I expect you and your engineering and your spreadsheets could probably keep track of it in your broken brain that you have. I love engineers. For any craftsmen that are
Some
engineers
would say,
listening.
superior, not
Wow.
broken.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Tell that to your designs that don't work in the real world.
I'm sorry that you just can't comprehend what we're trying to portray.
Oh my
I'm
God.
sorry.
Let's move on.
Yes. Yeah. You continue with your point. Sorry.
But no, it's hard to micromanage everyone's schedule.
Sure.
I mean, I was just checking in on Christian, on Brother DeLong today, because his he's having some family medical problems, and I made sure that he was doing okay, that if he needed anything from the lodge, how he and his wife were holding up, and they're doing fine.
Good.
But it's the problem of, I try to communicate with some of our candidates. I've been communicating with a couple of our candidates, but I just personally can't communicate with all of our candidates myself right now. And I also can't, I can barely keep my own work schedule memorized, let alone everyone else's work schedule. And that's the problem of, we have to have standards. We have to have standards of, people need to get their stuff organized and together and returned by a certain time. But also people need to be checking in or communicating with the lodge. Like we need to make candidates less afraid to communicate with us. That's, I think, a big thing we really need to do, is that the candidates and the entered apprentices and the fellow crafts can literally call us 24/7. I mean, yeah, I might be asleep, but if you leave me a text or a voicemail saying, "Hey, brother, I need to call you. I need to talk with you about something,"
I got you.
I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And that's something I think we need to be doing, is getting the entered apprentices, the fellow crafts, and potential candidates comfortable with communicating with us. Because, like you were saying earlier, it is not one party's fault. It's there's something wrong. There's something wrong with communication on both ends.
There was a hole in the cheese.
Oh, Swiss cheese is good cheese. It has holes in it.
Yeah, but not when you're talking about organizational standards.
Yeah.
Now,
More of a cheddar guy.
I will say, and going back to your story a little bit, at the time I was listening to it, I was actually taking the words and not saying Brother Gabriel wasn't, but I'm going to be tripping over myself a lot over this, because I'm not used to talking on mic and people actually listening. Please listen to me. But anyways, I was taking the words in, and in my head I was kind of painting the picture of watching, like, what was going on, and kind of like a movie. And at the end I was just kind of speechless. Like, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, should I apologize? Should I thank you? Should I tell you about a story about mine? But then the more that I was thinking about it, I don't want to tell a story that's similar, because there's nothing in this whole world that anyone's ever been through that is identical to you. Like, and I know you're not telling this story, like you said, for a pat on the back, or, hey, I'm so sorry, let's talk about this, let's work this through. You're just getting it out there to get it out there, to tell the history, to tell.
It happened.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a guy out there that could have been a phenomenal mason, and in my personal eyes, and I will take responsibility for the words that I say, he's a mason.
Yeah.
From me.
Yeah.
He did exactly what I would have expected any master mason to do, and he did it phenomenally.
Yeah.
He did. And we're all going through things. Rob, I'm not going to talk about his business, but he had a lot going on too. But he still carried my burden. Not only carried my burden, he practically picked me up by the scruff of my neck and drug me to the finish line. and I can never repay that.
No, you can attempt to,
I can
but
try, but
yeah.
I can never, like, there's no, even if he called me up right now and said, I want to be a Mason again, help me. And I got him through and I somehow finagled away and I found a way and we got it approved and he became a Mason. That's still not enough.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, that would just barely be scratching the surface. It's the least I could do.
You found, without looking, a diamond in the rough.
I did.
And I wouldn't even say you found it.
He found a rough ashlar that's like we all talk about how we'll never become a perfect ashlar. You found a rough ashlar that's like 95% of the way to being
It
perfect.
was smooth. I
Yeah.
mean, he just was, he did everything right.
And there are those, sorry,
Technical
listeners,
difficulties.
we have some stuff going on in Lodge that we got to take care of.
There's a ghost. Sorry about that, Craftsman. We heard a very loud sound in the lodge. Thought we had some Cowens and eavesdroppers coming in. And turns out our furnace is icing because it is 85 degrees outside. And we've pretty much been running the air conditioner nonstop.
Yeah.
So now that we know that the lodge is secure, we can come back and we can finish up this topic. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think we are definitely going to be one of the fellow customers that are looking at replacing our HVAC system this summer.
Probably.
So that's going to be a fun, hefty bill. But anyways, getting back to the topic, the story that you told us and everything.
I mean, yeah, it's not like what you were talking about. Like, it's not a story, that anybody needs to compare it to or what have you. It's just a story. It
Yes.
happened to me. It's an anecdote of a man who was interested in our organization, went through all of the degrees, learned everything he was supposed to, and then was left off on the wayside. No one ever followed up with him, and his life got too busy. The lodge's life got too busy. And imagine what he could have done by now. That was almost 10 years ago.
And like you said, it's no one person's fault. You can't look at the worship master of that here and go, you should have followed us. You should. Bless you to our listener that's sitting off the table. Also my fiance. But it's sad. It's a sad truth to know that happens throughout, like what Brother Gabriel was saying, not just lodges, but organizations, businesses. They lose those diamonds in the rough. They unfortunately fall to the wayside, and it's just saddening. And we hope, I can't speak for Brother Gabriel, but at least I hope I get to shake the hand or meet Brother Rob.
Oh, no, absolutely. I do too. I would like to pick his brain and talk to him and thank him for doing such a good job of protecting my brother.
Well, and the funny thing is I don't even know if Rob remembers it. I don't know if it, when you do something nice for someone like that, it never sticks with you.
Mm-hmm.
It sticks with the person you do it to. So, it's probably a really small piece, and I'm sure I've thanked him for it. But every time he's, oh, no big deal. That's what brothers do. That's whatever. But like, there's no, I don't even know. Like, there's no amount of words in the world I could say to this man to thank him for everything he's done. There's not really an action. I don't know what I would have done without him, and I probably would have lost my mind more than I already have.
And I'm glad that you're able to find him and he was able to find you, because
it was just too perfect.
Yeah, like you said, the great architect of the world or the universe or God or whoever you want to say knew you needed someone.
And it's not, I don't want to go into it too much on here because, that's not what Masons do. We don't talk religion, but it's not the only thing that happened during that time that makes me feel like maybe there was a little bit of divine intervention.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of very spooky things happen to me over those weeks that I always seemed to be in the right place at the right time with the right person in the right environment. I mean, then there's a whole story about how I was leaving the emergency room and ended up hit on the whole wrong floor of the hospital and ended up in the chapel and had a big long talk with our creator. And when I went and asked the maintenance guy, I was like, hey, how do I get out of here? I'm looking for the exit. And he's like, dude, you're on like the 7th floor. I did not hit the 7th floor. I hit the ground floor. So, I ended up
difficulties.
I ended up in places at the right time at the right place. Like something guided it. And I like to think that maybe in that circumstance, I was guided there as well because I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm usually the guy that's got the plan. I know how to handle a bad situation. I mean, even when we were talking about Brother Nefer, Ricky and I kind of rallied everybody together, and Ricky knew what his part was, and I knew what my part was, and we kept things going. But in that circumstances, it was too close to home, and I didn't know what to do. And I needed somebody. I needed something to pull me out of that darkness and set me down. And Rob did that for me. And I would just like to say, once again, Rob, if you're listening to this and you decide you want to come back and you want to be a Mason, I'll find a way. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. But I would also like to say to all of the craftsmen listening that are members of lodges, don't forget about your candidates. Don't write them off. Don't let them become Ronin Masons without a lodge, without a direction. Because just think where we would all be if somebody would have done that to us.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't be here doing this podcast. We wouldn't have met any of the people. You know, if somebody had written you off, Brother Ryan, somebody had just said, oh, you know, he's busy with college. He doesn't finish through. He doesn't follow up. You would have never met me. I would have then never introduced you to my friends. You would have never met your fiance.
Yeah.
You know, it's all, you never know what little things can happen.
It's a snowball effect.
It's a snowball.
Live in action, you always think about snowball.
Or butterfly effect, or
butterfly. Like
however
in the
you want to call
past,
it.
like, oh, hey, well, if this, but you don't realize, like, those events are happening live right now in your life. Think about what you did this morning, yesterday, a week ago, or what you plan to do this weekend or this upcoming holiday or whatever.
Sure.
And just think about, hey, 2 years from now, how is this going to change my future? How is this going to write it to the place I want it to be?
Well, and even then, even on a much more subtler note than that, the nice things you do for someone, they don't reverberate and come back around until farther down the line. I mean, one simple act of kindness kind of changed my perspective.
Yep.
I mean, it was the first time in my life that the fraternity, you know, we go to lodge and, you know, we hang out and we call each other brother and we're family. But, you know, it was the first time that trial by fire, the fraternity genuinely held me up the way that we say that it will.
Yep.
And, you know, I've had some moments over the years that were not so good and that kind of made me a little bit jaded to things, and I had to take a step back and look. But I could never leave it because of what happened with Rob, because I know that there's good Masons out there, and that if I want change to happen in this fraternity and I want the brotherhood to be this beacon of light in the darkness, I have to give that myself first. Yep. I get what I receive, but in the opposite for me, I received it. So now it's my job to go out there and give it back as much as I can and
Pay it forward.
And I do that for him.
Yeah.
And my hope is by getting a good eye on these candidates that we've got coming through, I want to see every single one of them get through it and be able to call them brother, and then I can actually name them by name, because we can't do that until they're officially members.
Which is something, I mean, really powerful that you were talking about earlier about not letting the lodge make Ronin Masons, not letting the current members make aimless, unaffiliated, almost Masons. But I also want to address prospective craftsmen and entered apprentices and fellow crafts. I know all of them come in for different reasons. Some, like we talked about in previous episodes, saw media of Freemasonry and are joining because they want to know more, are joining because they found their grandfather's ring and want to know what Freemasonry is all about. Don't be afraid to call your lodge. Don't be afraid to ask an older brother for advice.
Just ask questions in general.
Exactly. Yeah. All of, if you see a curmudgeon-y, crotchety old man on the sidelines of your lodge, despite the looks, 9 times out of 10, if you sit down next to that brother, he will talk your ear off about the wonderful times he's had in the fraternity, about how to do things, about who to call.
Oh yeah.
Don't let the scary old men frighten you. They would love to share their information with you. They would love to help educate you. They would love...
Those guys are that they've done it. They've been there.
Exactly.
They've
And
done
that's
it. They have a wealth of wisdom that we should be absorbing. But
exactly. And it's not that they've become complacent. I mean, some Masons have become complacent almost by accident. I don't think it's intentional that any of us ever become complacent in this fraternity. But when you do, when you've mentored hundreds of candidates, it just becomes almost like a fleeting idea. Like you almost forget about it.
right.
When you've done the junior warden part so much that you can do it in your sleep, it just becomes second nature.
Right.
So,
Well, and some people
Excuse
really are not good. I've mentored a few candidates. It's not my strong suit, but I can do it.
Correct.
I absolutely can do it. I was a lodge education officer for a couple of years.
I mean, I love teaching people. One of the first things I do when I approach trying to teach someone, the very first thing I do is I try to figure out what type of learner they are. Are they an audio learner? Are they a visual learner? Do they have to run through it multiple times? Like, do they have to walk through the motions to be able to learn it? And that really changes how you do it. I mean, I've been in military schools where everybody's cookie cutter, one way of teaching, force it down the throats. That's how you learn. That's how you rigid. That's how you discipline. That's how you get a block of 20 guys all marching in step.
Right.
But it's a little different when you're trying to connect with a brother to figure out what the needs of that brother are.
Well, and this isn't, what we're doing is not task oriented. It's very much a, we're talking about things on a spiritual level, almost on a knowledge level, and
On a personable
personable level. And you're helping instruct someone in different ways to think and handle their situations and maybe their own beliefs and how they tie those together. And not everybody is going to take to those the same way. But in the overarching scheme of everything, I would just like to say that I hope that we can learn from this lesson, from this story, and going forward, we can stop making these Ronin Masons that don't have a home, that don't have a place, and then just fall to the sidelines. And I feel like we lose so much when we do that. And I think all lodges in some way, shape, or form are guilty of it. I think it's happened. Sometimes it's out of our control. It's completely out of our control and we can't do anything about it. Sometimes a guy gets in and it is not what he was thinking it was going to be. And in that case, best case scenario, everybody parts ways. If you thought you were going to get in and join and find the treasure for, the secret Templar treasure that doesn't exist, probably. Do you like that? Probably, because I don't know. But if they find it, I don't want to be like, it doesn't exist, then I'm lying.
I'm guessing.
But ultimately, like, if you think that's what you're going to get joining Masonry, you're not going to find what you're looking for. If you think you're going to find a secret handshake that gets you, a free furnace job or a free,
House or a free car.
or it's going to get you a promotion,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen.
No.
But if you come in looking for a brotherhood, for enlightenment, for any of the things that the brethren that we have talked on the show with are looking for, we have that in droves. And we have different people with, different walks of life. But in most circumstances, I feel like time is our biggest enemy. We get a guy in and we're so quick to jump him into the EA. And then there's this big space in between where we're waiting for him to finish up, but he's not being involved. You know what I mean? Like we're not ingraining him into our society before he's, because we can't call them, they're not officially members until they get all 3 degrees, but there's nothing that stops us from dragging these guys to meetings and having socials and inviting these guys and saying, listen, this is what you're going to be a part of.
For several months, when I was helping Brother Faust start his Masonic journey, and that's a story for another time. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it took him a little bit to get his petition processed and to go through all the degrees. Like he's one of the longest standing fellow crafts that I ever known. He was a fellow craft for a long time, but he was at every meeting, and if he couldn't be at the meeting because it was a Master Mason meeting, he would stay downstairs because he would come for the dinners and he would go to the meeting if he could, but then he would wait and continue with fellowship after the meeting. Like, that's exactly what candidates need to do. That's like, I know every single EA and fellowcraft can't do that, but it's
Sure.
it pays out to do.
But it also probably shouldn't. We have to do certain things in Master Mason, but there are ways around that.
Yeah,
there are ways of
and I mean, I've also
doing
changed.
this,
Like, if I intended to open a Master Mason and there are EAs here, I've said we're opening an EA now because I want to include these brothers.
Correct. And that's what I'm saying. I know it's a pain. I know it's a couple extra minutes of doing another part of the degree, but it makes these guys feel so part of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I loved the fact that after I got my degrees, and I remember this vividly, I'm like, I get to come to meetings like, yeah, we will open for an EA every time you're here because we want you to be here. Worst case scenario, we'll have to kick you out for 15 minutes while we do something, and then we'll open right back up and you can come right back in. And I'm like, this is awesome. And then I got to watch what was happening, and I got to meet these guys, and it gave me that incentive to want to move forward even faster. And in theory, these degrees were not made to be something that was done in 3 months. In reality, being an entered apprentice was like a year. And then a fellowcraft was another year. And then a Master Mason was a whole nother year because you were learning things as you went along. Nowadays, you're not even officially a member until, at least in Ohio, until you get all 3. But instead of rushing these guys through, let's give them that experience while they're here. And, we keep droning. And I just would like to say, let's take this story and let's learn from it. Let's be better to our candidates. And those guys, if you get an opportunity to call up these guys that you haven't talked to, that haven't given back their proficiencies or something like that, call them up, see what's going on, see what the holdup is, see why they're not coming back, and let's see if we can give them what they're looking for. Because I hope one day that I can bring Rob back into the fold. That's my hope one day. I'll feel very accomplished if I do. But I would like to never see that happen again to anybody going forward.
The Craftsmen, we can continue talking until your ears fall off. But learn from these wise words. It's a quote that I heard or read. I do not remember the author, do not remember the person, but it is, you cannot change the past, but you can learn from it to change your present to make a better future.
I like that.
I like it. It's very good. Craftsmen, as always, thank you for tuning in to the Third Degree Masonic Podcast. We appreciate all your likes, views, and comments. We really appreciate some feedback and any ideas you have for future episodes or any requests for interviews. And remember, Craftsmen,
keep your working tools in order and always be on the level.
The views and opinions expressed in this show do not reflect those of the Grand Lodge of Ohio, its officers, or any of its jurisdictions, and only reflect those of the hosts or guests.